When a gang of motorcyclists attacked Vladimir Putin, they did not know that he is a master of judo. The way he punished them for it shocked everyone. It was a late evening, the sun sinking towards the horizon, painting the streets of a quiet town in golden hues. Time here seemed frozen. Life moved at a slow, almost drowsy pace, disturbed only by the occasional footsteps of passers-by. But this peace was short-lived. The roar of engines shattered the silence. 6 motorcyclists, clad in black leather and draped in chains, stormed onto the main street. Their growling bikes resembled predatory beasts, and they themselves, laughing and shouting loudly, seemed to be testing the town's resilience. Residents watched them cautiously from their windows before quickly disappearing behind drawn curtains. Doors slammed shut, and the street emptied in an instant. A few minutes later, a dusty blue pickup truck pulled up at a gas station across from a small restaurant. A man stepped out, his steps measured, boots quietly crunching against the gravel. A light-colored shirt, buttoned up to the collar, blended harmoniously with the muted tones of the town. This man was Vladimir Putin. His face bore the marks of years of experience, and his gaze, hidden beneath the brim of his hat, remained unreadable. To any outsider, he appeared to be just a traveler stopping for a meal. No one in the restaurant had the slightest idea who had just walked through the door. A small bell jingled as Putin crossed the threshold. He leisurely took a seat by the window, ordered a coffee, and leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed outside. The motorcyclists were still there, laughing loudly, speaking in brash tones, their presence dominating the street. But Putin remained calm. He sipped his coffee slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. The tense silence inside the restaurant didn't last long. Suddenly, the door swung open violently, and the motorcyclists stormed inside. Their heavy boots thudded against the floor, their voices loud and mocking. It was clear they didn't care that they were disturbing the peace. Conversations in the restaurant died down. The customers froze, while a young waitress, wearing a forced smile, instinctively took a step back. One of the motorcyclists had already thrown a vulgar remark in her direction. "Hey there, sweetheart, can't you see? We need some attention over here," he called out, grinning. Putin observed the scene from his table. His face remained impassive. He made no movement, gave no indication that he was even remotely interested in what was happening. Yet, beneath the brim of his hat, his sharp gaze tracked every one of them. The waitress shot him a fleeting glance. Brief, almost imperceptible. In her eyes was a silent plea. But he didn't react. The gang leader, a tall man in a worn leather vest covered in frayed patches, scanned the room. His attention was drawn to only one person, the man who hadn't shown a shred of fear since their arrival. "Hey, old man," he called out, striding toward Putin's table. "Are you deaf, or do you just not understand who you're dealing with?" The other motorcyclists chuckled, already anticipating yet another humiliation for an outsider. Putin lifted his gaze, meeting the gang leader's eyes with unwavering calm. "I didn't see your name on the door," he replied evenly, taking another sip of his coffee. For a moment, the restaurant was silent. The leader's smirk faltered briefly, but he quickly regained his composure, letting out a low chuckle. "Oh, I see," he sneered, taking another step closer. "You think you're some kind of tough guy?" The waitress stood frozen behind the counter, her hands trembling slightly. The rest of the patrons held their breath, afraid to move. Putin set his cup down on the table, his movements deliberate and precise. "It's time for you to leave," he said quietly. But there was something in his voice, something that made even the motorcyclists pause. The gang leader laughed, glancing back at his men as if seeking their approval. "Oh, you hear that, boys?" he jeered. This old man thinks he can tell us what to do." The bikers laughed, but their laughter no longer carried the same confidence. Putin remained motionless. He simply sat there, staring at the gang leader, and that look spoke louder than any words. The leader straightened up, crossing his arms over his chest. His smirk widened, but tension flickered in his eyes. "Listen, old man," he said, leaning in slightly. "You think your fancy words mean something? What if I just throw you out of here?" He reached out suddenly, his hand shooting toward Putin's collar. But he never made it. In an instant, before anyone in the restaurant could even register what had happened, Putin's hand moved like lightning, seizing the gang leader's wrist in an iron grip. The motion was swift, precise, and unexpectedly strong. The leader flinched, his fingers instinctively loosening. For the first time that evening, surprise flickered across his face. "I wouldn't recommend that," Putin said calmly, tightening his hold just slightly. The leader gritted his teeth and tried to yank his hand free, but the grip was unyielding, solid as steel. His face twisted in pain, and he took a stumbling step back, finally wrenching himself loose. A dead silence fell over the restaurant. The other motorcyclists exchanged uneasy glances. Then, one of them, a lean man with a tattoo snaking up his neck, lunged forward, his fist swinging toward Putin. Putin sidestepped effortlessly, letting the punch cut through empty air. With the same fluid motion, he delivered a precise strike to the attacker's shoulder. The impact landed on a nerve point, sending the man staggering back with a gasp, his arm momentarily numb. The others froze, their confidence wavering. The leader, however, straightened up, his face contorted with fury. "Oh, you think you're some kind of martial arts master, huh?" he spat. "All right then, let's see what you've really got, old man." He gestured sharply to his men. The gang moved as one, surrounding Putin from all sides, their eyes burning with aggression. But he was ready. With precise, fluid movements, he dodged their attacks, countering with chilling efficiency. One biker grabbed a chair, swinging it at him with full force, but Putin ducked under the blow, sweeping his attacker's legs out from under him in the same motion. The man crashed to the floor with a heavy thud. Another lunged with a wild punch. Putin caught his wrist, using the attacker's own momentum to spin him off balance. The man stumbled and went down hard, groaning in pain. Within moments, 3 of them were sprawled on the floor, groaning and clutching their injuries. The last 2 hesitated, their confidence shattered. The leader, jaw clenched in rage, charged forward himself. His punch was fast, but not fast enough. Putin shifted slightly, making him miss his mark. Before the leader could recover, a swift, well-placed strike to the ribs sent him tumbling backward. He hit the floor, coughing, pain flashing across his face. For several long seconds, he just lay there, breathing heavily, his hand clutching his side. "This isn't over," he growled through clenched teeth. Putin regarded him with a calm, steady gaze. "No," he said firmly. "It is over." The leader clenched his jaw, glancing between his fallen men and the man who had effortlessly taken them down. Something flickered in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. Fear. He exhaled sharply, then spat out a bitter command. "We're leaving." One by one, the motorcyclists hauled themselves up, bruised and shaken. They staggered toward the door, and moments later the roar of their bikes echoed down the street as they disappeared into the night. A heavy silence settled over the restaurant. Then, unexpectedly, the room erupted in applause. The waitress hesitated, then approached Putin, her voice still carrying the tremor of the recent events. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said, looking at him with admiration. Putin gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. "No thanks necessary." He took one final sip of his now cold coffee, then rose from his chair, leaving a few bills on the table. Around the room, the townspeople watched him with newfound respect. To them, he was no longer just a traveler passing through, but Putin didn't dwell on that. For him, this was just another stop on the road. The next day, just before noon, the familiar jingle of the restaurant's entrance bell drew everyone's attention. Heads slowly turned toward the door. Standing in the doorway was the gang leader. But he looked different. His leather jacket hung loosely over his shoulders, as if he hadn't been sure whether to wear it at all. His wrist was wrapped in a tight bandage, his face marked with scratches and bruises, reminders of the previous night's fight. But the most striking change wasn't his appearance, it was his expression. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone. In its place was something else. Hesitation, maybe even doubt. The waitress stiffened behind the counter, gripping its edge. A few townspeople tensed in their seats, their brief confidence from the night before now replaced with uncertainty. But Putin didn't even look up. He took another slow sip of his coffee, as if completely uninterested in who had just walked in. The leader hesitated, then took a few cautious steps forward. His boots scraped against the wooden floor, betraying his unease. He stopped a few feet from Putin, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, unsure of how to begin. Finally, he cleared his throat and spoke. "I wanted to talk." Putin leaned back slightly, raising an eyebrow. He didn't say a word, but his gaze invited the man to continue. The leader swallowed hard. "Listen," he began, his voice quieter than before, stripped of its usual bravado. "Last night, I went too far. We all did." He exhaled, lowering his eyes as if searching for the right words. "We thought we could do whatever we wanted. Walk in, intimidate people, take what we pleased, and leave like it didn't matter." A few seconds of silence passed through the restaurant. "But you put me in my place," he admitted, rubbing his bandaged wrist absent-mindedly. "And I think I owe you an apology." A ripple of quiet surprise ran through the room. The townspeople who had been bracing for trouble now watched the scene unfold with growing curiosity. Putin studied the man for a long moment. His face remained unreadable. At last, he spoke. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong," he said evenly. "Now you have a choice. Keep walking the same path or do something better with yourself." The leader slowly lifted his gaze, meeting Putin's eyes. "Better?" He scoffed lightly, but without his usual sneer. "What does better even mean for someone like me?" Putin leaned forward just slightly. "Respect," he said. "Start by giving it, and maybe one day you'll earn it in return." The leader stood motionless. A mixture of doubt, reflection, and, perhaps, understanding flickered across his face. After a moment, he gave a small, almost reluctant nod. "Maybe you're right," he muttered. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit. The sound of his footsteps was strangely subdued. Outside, he climbed onto his motorcycle and started the engine. The roar of the bike echoed down the street. But this time, there was no menace in the sound. This time, it was an ending. The sun slowly rose over the town, painting the streets in soft shades of pink and gold. The town was waking up, but something about it felt different. There was a sense of calm, a quiet confidence in the air. Putin stepped out of the small motel where he had spent the night. His movements were unhurried, his steps measured, as if nothing in the world could make him rush. He tossed his bag into the bed of the pickup truck, climbed into the driver's seat, and paused for a moment before turning the key in the ignition. His gaze drifted over the town one last time. The problems that had loomed over this place just the day before were now behind it. Maybe the townspeople wouldn't see him leave, but they would remember that he had been here. The truck's engine rumbled to life, ready for the road ahead. On the restaurant's porch, the waitress appeared. She spotted him and raised a hand in a quiet farewell. Putin touched the brim of his hat in response, before pulling onto the road. His silhouette quickly faded into the glow of the morning sun. But inside the restaurant, people were still talking about him. "He didn't just stop those bikers," an older man said thoughtfully, stirring his coffee. "He reminded us that we don't have to tolerate that kind of thing." The waitress nodded. "He's a legend," she said softly, smiling, "even though he doesn't seem to want to be one." Meanwhile, Putin drove on. The road stretched endlessly ahead, unfolding before him like an open invitation to new encounters and new challenges. He didn't think about the fight from the night before. He didn't think about the praise. That wasn't his way. He had simply done what he believed was right, and he had left the town better than he had found it. This story serves as a reminder that true strength isn't about brute force, but about confidence, self-discipline, and the ability to act with a calm mind. Even in the face of threats, it's important to remain composed and not fall for provocation. In this story, Putin didn't just stand his ground. He changed the situation for the better, proving that dignity and respect are choices anyone can make at any moment. If you enjoyed this story, give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more fascinating tales. And what would you do in a situation like this? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your take.